Good afternoon. I'm coming to you from our COVID safe house. I've just had our COVID test for Vermont, so we're hoping to get those results back. But again, this is a premiere set up as we are on the road. Purim has just occurred by the time you see this, and so I thought it would be good to deal with an apologetics issue and deal with Purim at the same time. So some of the facts around Purim may be familiar to you. But in light of this philosophical issue and the way we're going to look at the Book of Esther, I hope you'll get some new insight and you will apply this to the apologetics issue that's being mentioned that comes up a lot and see a little bit more for your own life in terms of God, as well as how the biblical worldview really answers questions and deals with its own objections. So we're here live with Zion's Banner in snowy Vermont near Newberry, a very small town that is near the New Hampshire border. And I want to give you a little background as we're sitting here. I almost feel like this is like a fireside chat. That's all I really need is the fireplace. But this issue came up because I've started reading a book on the Hiddenness of God by Michael Ray. Let's give full credit where full credit is due. At the same time, the issue of Deus absconditus, or the Hiddenness of God, has come up. And where did I get that word, Deo abscondis? It sounds like someone's ran away from somebody with something. Well, that's the actual term related to this issue of the hiddenness of God. Now, I've set OBS up so that you can see my second monitor with the help of my highly computer literate son. So there we are, Deus abscondis, and you can see the definition. God who in his remoteness seems to ignore human suffering. That's the way neo-atheists are taking it. We're going to look at this a little differently. In fact, I may end up doing other programs that touch upon this as I go through Michael Ray's book. But we're going to tie this to the issue of Purim. And so I'm going to take you through what I'm going to be preaching at a church that I will be visiting here. I'm scheduled to preach on the 10th at Northfield Church. And so I'm going to actually be preaching this very message. And so really you're getting a taste of the message on Wednesday that I will be shortly preaching. So let me switch us back over to the PowerPoint. This is so neat that I can do this in OBS and tape this. And bring us into the Book of Esther. I'm going to bring that second PowerPoint up. But I'm going to bring the camera and the second monitor up so that you can see things and you can kind of see me. Now, the placement here is a little less than my office at home. But I'm glad to be with you, and I'm glad that you can be with me. So let's get started on the issue of Deus abscondis and the Book of Esther. I'm going to make sure that I'm in a position. Here we go. It has become highly fashionable. Again, my dad raised this issue. Why doesn't God just make himself totally visible to everybody so that his existence and person are absolutely undeniable? My dad really kind of pushed on this issue very heavily. And I gave him some tentative answers. I don't know if Michael Ray would approve of those answers, but we're going to take a look at this very issue and see how this plays out. So this is fashionable. Why pick the Book of Esther and why discuss the Book of Esther at all? And this brings us up to Sarah, who is drinking her coffee in a short sleeve shirt, which, by the way, she would never wear here in Vermont this time of year. Does God restricting himself from entering into his creation in undeniable and extremely intrusive ways indicate that he is absent? Now, look at the way she's phrased that question. The argument by the neo-atheist is that because God doesn't make himself so absolutely and undeniably plain as far as his existence, then that's just proof there is no God. Now, Sarah has phrased it a little differently. She asks whether God restricting himself from entering his creation that way is an indication that he is absent, that he really doesn't exist, or he is not involved with his creation in any way. And so we're going to look at the one Old Testament book that does not directly mention God's name. The book of Esther does not directly mention God's name at all. And so I think it provides for us a unique answer to this issue of Deus absconditus. And so she then says, well, hey, look, if God's name is absent in the book of Esther, it's not directly used or stated, isn't that proof that in the book of Esther, God is a Deus abscondis, who is not there, unconcerned? And so I'm going to talk to you about the effect of not having God's name directly mentioned, because really it had a large effect. I'm going to go to the second monitor alone here. The book of Esther, now I'm quoting from the JPS Guide to Jewish Traditions. Very handy. The book of Esther is a dearth of explicitly religious content. In fact, the name of God is not mentioned once in the Megillah. Now, the Megillah is the Hebrew term for the scroll. Actually, there are 5 different scrolls or Megillot that are read on various days. Song of Songs is read on the Shabbat of Passover, which is coming up. The book of Esther, there's a Jewish holiday in which the book of Ecclesiastes is read. The book of Lamentations is read. And so these particular, and I want to be careful saying writings. They're all writings. They're all ketuvim in Hebrew. But the English Bible would put them under different sections. Esther would probably be placed as a historical book. I think that's the vision in most Bibles, most charts that I've seen that are non-Jewish charts. See, because Jewish charts wouldn't make that distinction. You have wisdom literature, which Ecclesiastes would appear under. And so the book of Esther and the book of Ecclesiastes appear in different places, but they're both Megillot as far as the normal division that you see in a chart that is a non-Jewish chart of the Bible. Now, what you need to know is the lack of the explicit name of God really troubled the rabbis, some of whom refused to admit the book of Esther into the Jewish canon. See, the fact that it was missing the explicit mention of God's name almost caused Esther not to be included in the Jewish canon. Now, think about the logic of this. From the Jewish standpoint, if God wrote a book, he would put his name in it. And so there was a real issue. Now, the Jews neither pleaded to God directly. You don't see God's name directly in there. And then some rabbis were concerned that what appears to be the warlike tone of the book of Esther might create a fear of the Jews, a backlash emotionally. Now, that shouldn't really be a spiritual consideration. That's a survival and practical consideration. But if God wrote a book, we need to include it. What I want you to understand is just how scandalous the lack of the book of God's name in the book of Esther really was. And so that's the GPS guide there. And I want to make sure that I get myself where I need to be. And go ahead and change our PowerPoint. There we go. Now, I want to talk to you that one of the things that confirms that the book of Esther should be in the Bible is the celebration of Purim. God allowed a Jewish holiday. By the way, not one of the Levitical 7 Jewish holidays. This is one of 2 holidays that is included that is not part of the original Levitical holidays. In the case of Esther, I'd still say it's a biblical holiday. In the case of Hanukkah, I would say it is a providential, permitted holiday that is acceptable because, really Hanukkah occurs between the 2 testaments. So we have further revelation. And we know from the Gospel of John that Jesus celebrated Hanukkah. And so that gives me divine warrant. Hey, if Messiah celebrates a holiday and considers it okay as a Jew, he was incarnated as a Jew, then I definitely think it's okay too. So we have those 7 holidays. We have at least 2, one of which is biblical but not part of the Levitical, one that's extra biblical in the sense of the Old Testament, but falls within the period of time for the biblical canon. And so let's talk a little bit about Purim. Now, Sarah is Sarah, so she doesn't need to know what Purim is. See, if I had Miguel on, maybe, or definitely I'm thinking like Ian, you know, they would be asking what Purim is. Now, Sarah knows what Purim is, but she wants to know how to explain it. Sometimes Jewish people are asked to explain their holidays. By the way, sometimes even Jewish people give the worst explanations for the holidays they celebrate. And so I'm going to go back to camera and second monitor and see how that works for Sarah real quick. And I'm going to slip back and forth because I want you to know that I didn't leave the room. Our little one is presently up. The backlighting here may not be absolutely perfect. I'm not under my optimum circumstances here, but the cool thing is that I can still do this. And that's kind of neat. On the road, I can still do this and do some special things. And so she asks how I would explain Purim. And as I said, sometimes Jewish people don't do a real good job of it either. I've heard Passover explained as celebrating freedom. No, it doesn't. Not in a heartbeat does Passover celebrate Purim. So let's talk about Purim customs for a little bit. Purim is the time that Jewish people actually dress up. Now, the reading is there because one of the big things that you do during Purim is to read through the story of Esther. Now, if you're at all familiar with Jewish holidays, and I've already seen some posts from our dear sister down under from Australia, Elizabeth Oakman, talking about her learning why Hamantaschen are shaped the way they are. That's a particular food that's ate. It's a pastry sort of food. It's a cookie. It's actually pointed with 3 points, and it usually has a filling of apricot, poppy seed, strawberry jelly can be used. It's called Hamantaschen. So she may be very familiar, and some of you may be familiar, but really one of the big parts of Esther is the retelling of the Esther story. Now, Jewish people have gotten a little creative, and they'll sometimes do a kind of take-off on the story of Esther, where the story of Esther is told, but with a little different sort of light to it. Kind of turned into a play. Like if you were doing Esther as Shakespeare, it's called a Purim spiel from the Yiddish. In synagogues, though, they just read the Book of Esther. Now, whenever Haman, he's the villain, he's the bad guy in our reading, his name's mentioned, we go, boo, and we often give the kids noisemakers because it's may Haman's name be blotted out. May his memory not continue, because his memory is a cursed memory. It is a bad thing. And so we acknowledge the badness and we make noise. If Mordecai or Esther are mentioned, see, they're the hero and heroine, we go, yay! And it's really kind of a lot of fun for kids. We had a Purim party at Hillside, which I did in years past. COVID has taken away a lot of things. And so we're not doing that presently, but it used to be a lot of fun. We'd give the noisemakers to the kids and we'd have treats. And in fact, one year we cast it as a play and we did kind of our own Purim rereading spiel. And so Pastor Brian got to be king. And of course, if Pastor Brian gets to be king, then obviously, and I'm going to use kind of the Southernism there because it's a Southern Baptist church. Miss Sarah got to be queen. And boy, I'll tell you, our pastor can really ham it up pretty good. And so we had a delightful time, but that's a big part of the reading of the story. And this is a time when kids dress up. When I was in New York, near Coney Island, doing my master's degree, the kids would dress up as Esther or as Mordecai. Yeah, and some kids would dress up as Haman, just to kind of keep the story going. And they would all go around. And so Jewish people, I didn't grow up with Halloween being it's not really a Jewish holiday. It's not considered a beautiful thing. What we would, what Orthodox Jews dress up for would be Purim. And so in Israel, Halloween is just not the thing, but Purim is the thing. This is often a time when people give charity. And so, I've already mentioned Hamantaschen. The reason they're called Hamantaschen is means Haman's hat. And so you got a 3-pointed hat. I don't know that this hat was 3-pointed. They're very good. They're very tasty. See, I like tasty Jewish holidays. Okay, and so Purim is kind of fun because you're still eating leaven and you're getting these cookies and they got fruit in them. I used to love the poppy seed ones my grandmother used to make, and that's a lot of fun. And then you go into Passover, which has got some nice food in it, but matzah gets really tiring, and so that's where we're at there. And so those are the customs. Now that's kind of an overview. And those are the things that Jewish people really remember. A taste and smell are very powerful senses for producing memories. And so this is a real fun eating sort of holiday. We also do charity. This is the time to go ahead and do charity. Now, we're going to go through and we're going to talk about, was God hidden in the book? Was he the hidden God? Was he absent? And that's a better word. Was he absent? You know, here's a case of human suffering. Was he absent? And I say suffering because the Jewish people were almost destroyed. There was a real danger here. Now, to do this, we can't go through the whole book of Esther. I'm not going to preach the whole book of Esther at this church. I don't have the time. But what we can do is get an overview of Esther, land on a key verse, and draw some conclusions. So let's talk about the book of Esther. Let's talk about the background. This is not part of the prophets, and it's not part of the Torah. This is part of the Ketuvim. This is the writing. I consider it a companion book to Daniel. So if I was going to say, you know, I like to think of how books fit together, okay? Daniel and Esther are sort of companion books to each other. Ruth and Judges are sort of companion books. And then we even have books that tie in very strongly to the New Testament, such as Leviticus and Hebrews. Really should be done together. Revelation and Daniel. If you've not gone through Daniel and you do the book of Revelation, you missed it. You just plain missed it. If you talk about the book of Leviticus and you don't reference, the book of Hebrews and you don't reference Leviticus, you have missed it. Really, sometimes I think book studies should be done with the books that carry the same theme or relate to a similar situation. Daniel is living in exile, and the book of Daniel, you know, if you get nothing else, the book of Daniel is about how Jews were to live in exile. Okay, it's about how the godly should live in exile. And that's really what you need to understand as far as Daniel's purpose in the canon. Now look at the beauty of this. Esther is how God protects his people in exile when they are in disfavor covenantally with him. Okay? It connects Daniel to Ezra and Nehemiah. So you got Daniel, you have Ezra and Nehemiah, which are about the return. You have Esther, and historically, Esther sort of connects Daniel and Nehemiah together. So now you're getting a feel for how your canon works. Esther is in the middle of the sandwich. Daniel and Nehemiah are this piece of bread. I have to remember, you know, that I'm in reverse. And then you have, and that's the way that works. So that's the background, okay? Now, they are told in Jeremiah, don't fight this thing. You're going into exile. I told you I've had enough. Okay, I've just had enough of you guys. You've sinned. Now I need to invoke the punishment clauses of our covenant. Remember, the covenant had a spanking provision with multi-parts to it so that the people would know when they were out of covenant with God. And there's a program I'm thinking of starting to put together for you guys while I'm on the road that I think would be real interesting, but that's where they're at. And so Jeremiah says, here's what you do. You're going. It's a done deal. God said this discipline needs to happen. So in Jeremiah, they're told to seek the peace of the city, that being Babylon, a really, really bad pagan place to which they were, sent originally at the beginning of the exile. They were not threats, but rather contributors to their society. Now, the godly among Israel took this seriously, and they contributed. Daniel contributed to the good of the city. And I would say that we are coming to a time where we are in exile. We are not the predominant worldview. I get bugged over the stuff that's happening. I know you do too, but if anything else, if you're reading Jeremiah or Lamentations, what you should get from that is how we're to live as we enter a time of what I would call living in a very pagan society. But that's a Jeff Cran soapbox for another day. Now, when we start this, we start with an accusation. There's an accusation here that is so typical. I want you to hear this accusation because I'm hearing it nowadays. Haman said to King Ahasuerus, or Ahasuerus, actually it's King Xerxes. He's pretty much near the end of before the Greek Empire comes in. So you have the Medo-Persian Empire, and then you have the end of that empire. In fact, people often associate him with the Xerxes that makes the Greeks really mad. And so you're going to have a change in empire. This is the end of the Medo-Persian Empire and the coming of the goat in Daniel, representing the Greek Empire. Now, Haman is an Agite. Now, why is that important? Because the Agites were supposed to be destroyed. But Saul spared the king of the Agites temporarily. And so there's thought that he's directly related. By the way, Mordecai is a descendant from the family of Cush, where Saul, who spared the Agites, comes from. And I could do a whole message about how God works through generations. But he's going to accuse people. He does not like the Jewish people. He does not like Mordecai. Listen to this accusation. There's a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from other people's laws. They do not keep the king's laws. Therefore, it is fitting for the king, not fitting for the king to let them remain. If it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they are to be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work to bring it into the king's treasuries. So Haman says, here's these people that don't fit in. They're different. Their laws are different. Their customs are different. Now, get this very clearly. I am seeing such an upclick in anti-Semitism. It is not funny in this country. And it's fitting to discuss this with Esther, because Esther really is about the preservation of God's people on some level here. Now, this is chapter 3. Chapter 1 and 2 are there to set up Esther being in the place that she is to be in. But Esther being in the position that she's in is not the problem. We're going to find out that God is going to use that as part of the solution. That's not the issue. Now, in chapter 1, Vashti refuses to come and parade herself around the king. He's having a party with the boys, with the nobles, and they all get drunk. Not a good plan. And the king says that she's to appear in her crown. Now, the rabbis believe that that's all she was supposed to wear. And Vashti says no, and she wants to make a party for the girls so they can have girls' night out. And, of course, that was not acceptable. And so Vashti is removed from her office, and so the king looks for a fill-in. And that's when he gets all the beautiful girls together. And, of course, Esther, whose Hebrew name is Hadassah, is taken to the palace and gains favor with the king. And Haman, who does not have Mordecai bow down before him because he believes that people should bow only to God, just gives Haman, fuels everything in Haman. And so he decides to destroy the Jewish people. Now remember, I said this is an overview. When the accusation comes, now the threat comes. Okay? And so there's this accusation in Esther 3, 8, and 9. Now, Haman's plan is accepted by the king, who is not thinking things through. Remember that Esther hid her Jewishness. I mean, it's Esther. It's not Miriam. She had a Persian name, Esther, and her Hebrew name, was not what she was going by. And by the way, I have a Hebrew name and an English name. In times after threat, or in times when there might be threat again, Jewish people have traditionally given their kids a Hebrew name and then a name so that they could not stand out so much when persecution came. That's changing. My kids have purely Hebrew names. And our little granddaughter, who it's almost be fun to get her on camera, cutest little thing, Aliana, has a Hebrew name. But we've enjoyed relative peace. I think that's changing. Okay? But the kings agreed, so letters were sent. Look at this in Esther 3, 13 through 15, by couriers into all the king's provinces to destroy, kill, and annihilate the Jews. Not just Mordecai, the Jews. Which Jews? The young, the old, little children, and women. This is a complete genocide here that is planned. In one day. Now the word Purim comes from the word pur, which means a lot. And so it's a lot, because he had to pick a day for this. He drew lots, and it came out on a certain day. Okay, and the 13th of the 12th month. That is the month of Adar. Remember that under the old Jewish calendar, the beginning of the year was in Nisan, so Adar would be the 12th month. And a copy of the document was issued as law in every province, being published to all the people that they should be ready on that day. The couriers went out and hastened by the king's command, and the decree was proclaimed in Shushan the citadel. So the king and Haman sat down to drink. They've just plotted entire genocide here. The king just being complicit, not knowing what the daylights he's doing, as far as its true import. And of course, Haman, being the villain he is celebrating with the king in the kingdom of but the city was perplexed because the Jews were contributing to the society, and so they get this decree, and so the question is, what's going on here? Okay? At the beginning of this, Haman's in this position because he was promoted to it. And this is where we, get a feeling for him being an Agite, but he's moved into position. Now watch this from a game point of view. Esther has been moved into the chessboard on the queen's position, and Haman has been moved into the position of like a bishop or a knight here, and he's influencing the king. Now, as I said, this is highly significant that he's recognized as an Agite because Saul was supposed to kill off the Agites. And he spared Agag, who he was supposed to destroy, and this appears to be a descendant of King Agag. And so what's interesting is Saul, the ancestor of Mordecai, fails to do what God said. Mordecai, the descendant of Saul, finishes what Saul was supposed to do. And that's a lesson in itself, but not for today. Okay. Now, a dilemma's occurred now. Esther's in a key position, but her people, including her own, beloved Mordecai here, are all in danger. And so she speaks to one of the eunuchs. Now, it was traditional back then. You have all these gorgeous girls, and you're putting a guy in charge, to protect them. But the problem is you don't want the guy to enjoy his position too much, and so he would be made a eunuch. That's really kind of not cool, but was understandable because, he's to be the protector of these women, not to be the beneficiary of the women. And so she talks to this individual and gave him a command for Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces, any man and woman who goes into the inner chamber of the king who has not been called, he has but one law: put all to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, and that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called into the king for these 30 days. And so they told Mordecai Esther's words. Now, Mordecai has gotten word to Esther about this decree, and it's become known. And so, um, you know, Mordecai is looking for to deal with this. And so Esther says, even though I'm in this position here, this is like your death to me. If I go in here before the king calls for me, this is like really, really bad news. Really, really awful news. And the king hasn't called for me, which means, I may have lost favor. He may have lost interest. Um, he is not looking for me to visit him. So I don't know how he's going to be disposed to me. And the key was that the king could override and extend his golden scepter, which would then make this not a death penalty, would be extending, as it were, a grace, and that individual would not be killed. But she doesn't know what his reaction is going to be, and it could be death. Okay? Now we're going to get to our key verse, but you have to understand that when Esther decides to step in, she does ask for fasting. And there really is a fast of Esther that occurs before. Okay? Now, she decides to do this, but Mordecai has a famous line here where we're going to go back to, and we're going to look at. But understand that she does this knowing full well. Now, Dr. John C. Whitcomb, who is a brilliant scholar who is now at home with the Lord, felt that both Esther and Mordecai were not saved. I respectfully disagree. I do not think a mere cultural Jew is going to do this necessarily. I mean, even as a stopgap measure, I don't believe that a cultural Jew is going to go ahead and do this. Although there is not the clear use of God's name here, fasting in order to seek God was a religious thing. In the case of her maid, she's going to ask that they join her in this. Okay? Now, the good news is this works. When the king saw Esther in the court, she found favor in his sight. She has no reason to believe that she will. And the king held out the golden scepter that was in his hand, and Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. Now, you can make a clear analogy between, King Ahasuerus. You have God who extends salvation in Jesus Christ as the scepter that provides deliverance from the decree of death. And I'm not taking anything away from that. But we're talking about Deus absconditus today. Is God really absent in times of human suffering? He appears to be hidden. Is he absent? Does that really stand as evidence that he doesn't exist? No, it doesn't. We're going to see why and what's happening there. Okay? Just to let you know, the idea of the scepter being tied to Messiah, remember I said you could look at the Messiah being the one who is sent out from the Father so that the decree of death does not take us. For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. And so Jesus is the extended scepter of the Father. We know from Numbers 24:17 through 19 that Messiah is referred as the scepter. And so in that sense, a scepter really is promised. Okay? And that's really part of the answer to a Deus abscondus. Is God the hidden God because he's not there? No, not at all. His hiddenness, as it were, the fact that he has not made himself undeniably present visibly in his creation in this day and age, does not in any way prove he doesn't exist, because he has sent himself in the person of the scepter as Jesus, okay, Jesus being the scepter, and proven his existence and his intervention in terms his loving intervention into his creation. But that's another thing, okay? I want to let you know the same charges exist, and I've said this. I do not know whether she was reelected, but we have senators now who have said things very similar to Haman. Ilhan Omar is particularly one of those who indicates a trend. I think it was CNBC that did one of their recent fictional programs, one of the regular programs, where they misrepresented Jewish law to make the Jews look bad. There's an Orthodox Jew and his Jewish son who's in the hospital, and they make them look really bad, and they misrepresent Jewish law. And so that's very much the case, and I'm seeing more and more of that. And so, I would sort of beware. The same charges are there. We do live under another authority. We are exiles. Seek the good of the city really is something that we need to kind of take seriously now. We really are exiles in a land that is becoming increasingly, here in America, not ours. And okay, again, Messiah is the scepter. Let's talk about this key text. I'm going to give you something you may not have seen before. This is Mordecai's charge to Esther before she decides to go before the king. If you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance may arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you've come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Now I want to take two things out of this and help you. Deus absconditus, the hidden God. He's hidden because he's not there. We don't have him invading history in an undeniable way because he can't. First of all, you need to understand, from another place. Look at those words, from another place. And if I can laser them for just a second, and I may just try to do this. That's not where I wanted to go. So I'm not quite sure what happened here. I'm going to bring that down and go from current slide and go back just a little bit and laser point it here. There we go. That's what I want. There we go. From another place, and I've got that there. And you kind of saw that. I know that you're seeing a few other things here, but I'm going to bring that back. There we go, another place, just to make sure it shows. The word place there is mekum in the Hebrew. Now remember I told you about circumlocutions. Jewish people do not use the name of God and banty it around. There are circumlocutions. We talked about the name. The place was another one of those. Now whether it existed in Esther's day or becomes popular later on is sort of a which came first, the chicken or the egg. I haven't done enough research, but I want to let you know that there's a subtle reference to God in terms of him being the place here. Okay, how can Mordecai be sure? Because of God's promises. And so help will arise from another place, maybe God himself, but you and your family will perish. See, God's not going to sit fit to bless and protect you. But maybe you're the means that God intends to use. And that's sort of what Mordecai is saying to Esther. Is God absent? No, he's not absent. He is going to bring deliverance. He may do it himself or some way other than Esther, or he may choose to work through Esther, but he's anything but absent. Now, the entire book of Esther is designed to demonstrate that God isn't absent. The providence of Esther being brought to the throne is clearly there. And so, but the mention of help coming from another place may be a subtle reference to God's name. Now, there's something else there. There's some lettering that's kind of interesting. There's a variant spelling in two words that spells God's name in the Hebrew text. But maybe this is a little more clear to a Jewish audience. By the way, why wasn't the name of God included in the Book of Esther? Remember where those people are living at the time. This is probably written, or most often is thought to be written, by Mordecai. And so if it was written by Mordecai, and they're still in the Persian Empire, you kick someone when they're down. Okay? And so that's a very good reason for that name not being there. How is God present? Well, we've kind of touched on this. In her unique position and opportunity. Who do you think put Esther in that position? And that help from another place. Was God not present because he wasn't existent? No, he was very present, but behind the scenes. See, hiddenness does not equal absentness. This is a mistake that is being made here. Hiddenness is being equated with absentness. And since God is absent, the claim is being made that he's absent because his existence is absent, not just because his person seems to be absent. But he is not absent. He is clearly there, here. And so this claim is false. Now, let me tie this into something. If you've not visited us at Patreon, please do. We are making major differences. And I have just scheduled my first post of Apollo Bites, which, by the way, all 3 levels are entitled to under Patreon now. Now, it's not really due until the next month's billing, but that's okay. I put up my first Apollo Bite, which is a nugget related to the Word of God and or to apologetics. In other words, it's a nugget related to apologetics and related to Bible teaching. And it may be a little bit more of an apologetic nugget, or it may be a little bit more tilted towards Bible teaching. The Apollo Bites will be unique. They are the refrigerator magnet sayings. So I haven't given up refrigerator magnet sayings, but now I have a refrigerator magnet saying with a minor few paragraphs of thought related to explaining that refrigerator magnet saying. And that's an Apollo Bite. So you are free to get those on Patreon. And that's a new perk. Now, if you support us through Chosen People, I'm not ignoring you. Please email me and tell me you're interested. I can pull them from Patreon and send them to you. I can even schedule emails now. But this story of Esther is the proof that God is not absent. This narrative allows us to see that God is not absent. And you cannot ignore the narrative and expect to find the author. If you will ignore the story, then you cannot know the author. Okay, now I put that a little differently in the Apollo Bite, so you'd have to look at it. But the bottom line is, these narratives move us forward, even when our own life narratives do not necessarily give us irrevocable proof of God's presence. So I know that we're running a little earlier today, and I'll be working on doing this on the road. It really is different doing it this way. But I'm looking forward to you being back with me when I do these live. And in the meantime, Streamlabs now allows me to show 2 monitors. And so we've even improved in the way we're doing this on the road. Check us out. Check out the website, www.zionsbanner.org. We have improved that. And that's going to have new material on it and is better organized, looks better. So this has been time to, in a sense, streamline, perfect materials, and try to keep touch with you on the road as I try to do speaking and spend time with the family. Well, I'm glad to have you with me. I know this was different and it might not be as new, but it is a more personal look at my life yet again. And so I am so excited to have you join me here in Vermont. See you soon. Blessings.